So officially, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Responding to Disruptive Events. I'm Joel Anderson, the VP of Marketing with Tier4 Advisors. Grateful to have you join us. I want to introduce you to our founder and chairman who will be hosting today's panel along with our panelists. We have Eric McVey, who's our CIO at Tier4 Advisors, phillip.files, VP of Solution Consulting at Five9, Brandon Peccoralo, General Manager for Databank, Kelly Higgins, our Senior Vice President of Solution Architecture, Tier4. David.clardy is the Senior Sales Engineer with Mitel. So before I hand the time over to Jake, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded, so you will have access to it at a later date and time for replay, and also to share with friends, family, whoever. And then if you would like to participate during the Q&A section, you have the ability to do so down at the bottom. There is a little box that says Q&A. You can type in questions for our panelists, and we'd love to be able to engage with you and answer some of the questions that you have. So without further ado, Jake, I will turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everybody, for attending. Appreciate all the panelists' time as well. Looking forward to a great conversation. As Joel mentioned, today's webinar is about responding to disrupting events. As with all of our webinars, if you've attended all of them or some of them, you know that we start with introductions. So Brandon with Databank, we're going to start with you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and what you do.
Sure, thank you. I'm Brandon Peccoralo, General Manager here in Atlanta for Databank. We erected this facility about 2 years ago with our anchor tenant, Georgia Tech. We do a plethora of supercomputing in this facility, and this is one of 20 data centers that Databank own and operates. In addition to that, we're also a cloud computing and cybersecurity provider. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Brandon. Phillip with Five9. Go ahead and introduce yourself to the crowd, please.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's phillip.files. I'm Vice President of Solution Consulting with Five9. Five9 is a cloud contact center solution provider that's been in the market since 2001. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much. Eric McVey, our CIO here at Tier4.
Hey, welcome everybody to the call. Thanks for our partners joining us today as well. I've been with Tier4 since 2016. I've been in IT for, I did the math last night, unfortunately, 33 years. So seen a lot of things, from floppy disks to all the way to 2 terabyte USB sticks. So a lot of change. Thanks for joining.
And we are also joined by another Tier4 Advisors team member, Kelly Higgins, our Senior Vice President of Solution Architecture.
Thanks, Jake, and thanks everyone for attending today and our partners for joining us. Kelly Higgins with Tier4 Advisors. I've been with Tier4 for about 5 years. Like Eric, I have over 30 years of IT experience, from leadership to driving change for travel related companies and risk management and insurance services related companies, holding various leadership positions. So excited today to hear our partners' viewpoints on some of these areas of critical disruptors.
Thanks, Kelly. And then David with Mitel.
Yeah, thank you for having me, guys. David.clardy with Mitel. I'm a sales engineer here based out of the Atlanta area, supporting the Southeast for our MyCloud Connect platform. So Mitel has been in the industry for going on, I believe, 40 years. I've been here 10 of those years and supported many different roles and platforms, seeing the transition in the communications industry. So excited to be here, happy to add our perspective and hopefully some insight for our customers.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, guys, for the time there, and we'll go ahead and get started. So with regards to disruptions, they happen all the time in the world of business and IT, as we're well aware. Some disruptions more significant than others, but always promoting critical decisions to be made by our leaders. The purpose of today's webinar, again, is to discuss some of our recent experiences regarding disruptions that have caused a more challenging impact on your clients and our clients, respectively. And even more, maybe our own companies that we can share. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Brandon, we'll go ahead and direct this first question to you, but other panelists, certainly please chime in as you see fit. But Brandon, can you share an example of maybe some merger and acquisition, or obviously M&A type of activities? How maybe you or some of your team members have helped in the past?
Sure, absolutely. I think merger and acquisition used to be easier from a partner standpoint because things were more separated and segregated as companies owned more of their own infrastructure. They home grew a lot of their own applications, databases, CRM systems. And so, for example, in the 90s and 2000s, if you had a merger and acquisition for data center, you just looked at the offices, the telco closets, you looked at the data centers, the different assets on the different books that those companies owned. And did the parent company or did the majority shareholder want to absorb all of the assets of the other company? Or did they want to shut down both assets and then have a centralized data center? So, you would have two data centers. Do we use one data center or the other, or do we shut down both assets, get those off our books, and centralize into a co-location facility or a data center? And so for the early 2000s, you had a ton of that, right? And so that's where a lot of these data centers were building out hundreds of thousands of square feet. With the advent of virtualization and the cloud, now it's a lot more of a hybrid approach, and you have to get deeper into the application and IT stack and higher up the IT stack in a merger and acquisition. So down here, for example, two banks just merged, SunTrust and BB&T. Well, they have a lot of different applications that need to be converted and absorbed by one another. And so we particularly aren't working with them at that layer, but I have a lot of friends that are. And that's a major project. So it's not an easy lift and shift anymore. And it's important to team with somebody or a partner like Tier4 and some of your partners that get down into that application layer, into that container layer, into the cloud layer, and kind of go to that proverbial whiteboard, draw everything up, and create a partner team that can attack each layer and piece everything together because it's not that easy anymore. And that's why I particularly like to be a data center provider that also offers cloud computing, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, cybersecurity as a service, because again, you can kind of have more of that lunch that's on the table that the customer's spending.
Yeah. David, do you want to chime in there from a Mitel perspective? How have you helped, maybe guide clients through M&A?
Yeah, so we actually had a recent one. It was a water treatment facility that we were actually assisting with. They were acquired by a private equity firm. And part of the acquisition, obviously, they were trying to look at their entire organization and how they had to split IT, human resources, all the way down their communication solution. With them being acquired by a private equity firm, they weren't looking to, increase any further capital investment right after their acquisition. So we're able to come in and look at it from a cost perspective and structure it so that the new ownership, was able to work within their budget. And then from a technology perspective, come in and meet the requirements that they needed and their rather aggressive timeline. So they had a very short window of only a few weeks so that they could quickly and easily get through the M&A. And we were able to facilitate that with the cloud-based platforms we offer today.
And Phillip, you want to chime in from a 5.9 perspective? Obviously, when people go through mergers and acquisitions, technologies change, strategies change. I'm sure 5.9 has a lot of examples to speak of.
Yeah, and I think kind of the first challenge for many companies that go through that experience is just level setting what they have, right? And what makes sense to maintain, what makes sense to lift and shift. How do you evolve into a more cohesive strategy? Similar to David's comments, right? We've worked with several clients who have done acquisitions, some mergers where they're just trying to find, a path forward strategically. How does 5.9 fit into that path? And we're giving them guidance around, what a phased approach might look like, how to grow into the right infrastructure and solution and not feel like you're trying to boil the ocean as part of that experience.
And as we talk about that, to be off, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in there. I appreciate the partner's answers. There's a people factor in an M&A situation, right? So, and people handle change differently. There's when you think about people are used to using their own tool sets, and the acquiring or the merged company comes in and they've got their own set of tool sets. You've got people that are, no, I've sat in this same chair for 100 years. I'm not changing, and I'm not going to change my tools. You've got employees that will kind of like, okay, whatever. We'll just play along. And then you've got other employees that are just all about jumping in and suggesting new ways to do things, in this change. So as a leader, you have to kind of gauge that mentality as your employees work through the change of a merger and acquisition.
Yeah, Jake, I'd like to tag on to what Eric said. Tier 4 provides that kind of assessment. Brandon touched on it earlier. We look at all areas of people, process, and technology. So it's as Eric said, there's culture shifts, there's people changes. Tier 4's assessment process can help a company navigate through those difficult times.
Absolutely. With regards to, waking up one day and we're all going into the office doing business as usual, and then we wake up the next day and everyone's working from home and kind of scattered in an effort to keep things going from a professional standpoint, but obviously working in a different environment. From a 5.9 and Mitel perspective, just curious, maybe Phillip, we'll start with you. What have you seen from a contact center perspective where an organization may have said, yeah, eventually we'll get to that, to maybe reaching out and saying, hey, we need this yesterday. And how can 5.9 help us?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the beauties of the cloud, and a key value proposition is the fact that, location becomes somewhat agnostic when you deliver your service through a cloud offering. And so to your point, with the recent events in the world, what we've seen is a growing number of organizations who've said, we're brick and mortar. That's very central to our culture. It's very important to the way we operate. We don't necessarily have that option anymore. So how do we quickly accelerate more of a work at home or a remote work offering to just stay in business, right? Keep the business flowing, keep the lights on. And as I mentioned earlier, that's really one of the key benefits to a cloud solution, is the fact that location, I don't want to say is irrelevant, but it's certainly less relevant than it was in the old days of having servers racked and stacked in your data center, right? So we can very quickly facilitate that move for customers. And we've been doing that day in and day out over the last several weeks.
Yeah.
How about Mitel? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything Phillip said. I mean, we're also seeing that transition as well with the current state of, the world right now, with everybody trying to determine how they can do business the way they used to within their brick and mortar, but utilizing tools like a cloud-based communication solution to facilitate that. And, we've been doing that very same thing as well, things that are transitioning these traditional customers that they do go to an office every day or have been, throughout their, existence. And now they're needing to utilize these tools that we offer and transition them quickly. As Phillip said, for a cloud-based solution, it's very easy to transition them, get them moved over and up and running remotely where they used to be on premise.
So when we talk about disruptions, obviously there's a lot of different definitions of what a disruption is to a business. I think it's fair to say that leadership changes are disruptive. We all probably have things to share in that regard, but maybe Eric, start with you, and then Kelly, maybe as a follow-up. Can you share, maybe a real-world example of when you were, maybe a junior team member, or something happened where, executive or leadership changes took place, and what was that impact like on the organization, and how did you kind of navigate those waters? Eric, you're on mute.
I do that every time. Sorry. You start with us because we're the old guys and we got the most war stories. Is that what I'm hearing? So one of my former companies, we had a change in the director of IT. And this gentleman was, uber focused on budget. And at the time I had a worldwide organization of 150 direct support personnel under my prowess, and so I was always doing one-on-ones, every day, right? So anyway, this new director, he was laser focused on budget, and he found a shortfall that the previous director had missed. And 3 months into my job, I had to cut 40% of my staff to cover the shortfall. So when you're going from a 24/7, 365 follow the sun type support organization, and you're down 40 something people, you have to learn to dance pretty quick. So we had to quickly do shift work, and actually looked at some automating some of the tasks that they were doing. So we were kind of automating before that was a term, but that was a real shock to the organization, and really to the boots on the ground.
Yeah, Jake, I'll jump in. Looking back at my work experiences as well, I think leadership change can be one of the most either pleasant or most disruptive for someone personally. There's a lot of anxiety about if you just lost your direct leadership, your boss, if you will. You don't know what's coming. You don't know what the new person's going to want to bring in, and sometimes they they bring in their own staff, if you will. So that creates a lot of uncertainty and doubt with someone. And so instead of giving a specific example, I think over the years I learned to try to maintain a level of understanding and understand a support structure. You've got to show a willingness to adapt and be flexible if a new leadership comes in place, and you have to be able to show your value when that happens. And not everything's going to go your way, but be very supportive at all turns. And if you're doing all those things and show the commitment to the cause, you can survive those leadership changes. Oftentimes, though, there's an undercurrent that you just can't control, and hopefully you're prepared for that. But if you do all those things I said, build the trust, show your respect, and be relevant, it usually can turn out positive.
I've actually had some recent experience in this, particularly with Tier 4 advisors as well, and an end user. We had a big company here in Atlanta have a major leadership change at the CTO, CIO level, and that's who we were working with. Believe it or not, one of the guys was my neighbor. And so as they transitioned out, I came to find that we just had a really solid relationship with my neighbor, which once that disappeared, consequently, so did that relationship. And so it really taught me a lesson of kind of social networking horizontally inside that company, do a better job of that, but also outside of the company, right? So I had reached out to Sam at Tier 4 Advisors, and sure enough, Sam had a relationship with other people inside that organization and was able to help Databank re-inject ourselves into the good graces and into the mind share of this end user. And so that particularly for me was a learning, it was a lesson, right? I thought I was attached at the highest level. We were golden. Once that was a, let's call that a single point of failure, right? Once that relationship dissolved and he went on to another organization, we had a disadvantage. And so that was a lesson learned. And again, I would say, leverage your partners as deep as you can into that network. Go on LinkedIn, whatever it is, find out who's connected to various folks inside the organization, and don't have that single point of failure of a relationship.
Yeah, and disruptions, again, come in different shapes and sizes, right? So as we talk about, different types of disruptions on today's conversation, we talk about, maybe when budgets change. So David, we'll start with you on this one, but, tell us about, how you've, maybe seen, a budget, change that either forced a project to the forefront, or maybe delayed something in your engagement with clients?
Sure. So actually, I had a recent one. We had a large healthcare organization we were working with in the Birmingham area. They're looking for a new solution, trying to phase out some of their older on-site premise equipment. It's becoming increasingly unreliable, very costly for them to keep operational. When we first discussed, the solution with the customer, budget really didn't seem as big of an issue, right? It was almost like they were wanting to have like a blank check. They were making a large investment in a new solution to take them to the next level in their industry. And they had a real big emphasis on customer experience and omni-channel communication. Then obviously with the existing looming pandemic, this was about a month or two ago, they decided to take a step back and kind of reel in what was their expectations as far as budget, what were they willing to spend in order to get a new solution. And we were able to sit down with them, look at all aspects of both circuits, applications within their organization, processes, things that we were going to consolidate with this new solution and take advantage of all of that so that we could use their existing budget and spend to get them the technology they needed for that omni-channel communication to better serve their customer base.
And Phillip, how about you over at Five9? Have you had a similar experience or something else maybe different?
Yeah, I think budget disruption is a very timely topic based on obvious events in the world. And similar to David's, right? Customers are trying to balance right now. What can they do? What should they do? How much should they spend? In many cases, budget impacts are kind of negative. You go from that heavy investment, maybe arguably open checkbook, to more constrained resources. And I think in those instances, it's imperative to sit down, reevaluate scope, reevaluate user technical functional requirements to make sure that the organization has consensus where it can on what you can deliver within those budget constraints, right? And what may have to be deferred to a later phase, a later project, or maybe just completely scratched. And then within that reevaluation, it's important to look at, what are the things we're measuring from a KPI perspective to ensure the project's successful, and have those had a material impact based on any budget changes.
And Eric and Kelly, not to put you guys on the spot, but you've seen budget changes happen quickly, if not overnight. Maybe Kelly, start with you. Anything you want to chime in on that regard?
Yeah, I mean, budget cuts are almost a certainty in this day and age. And over the last 3 months, we've had numerous clients come to us and say, how can you help? And so we have partners like Mitel and Five9 and Databank that can come in and help a client understand where they can reduce their operating costs through their types of services. So if they're looking at one of those services, we'll steer our clients to those partners. Likewise, we can take advantage of some of the assessment and expense management practices that we are known for. We can help clients identify telecom or networking expense and find 20, 30% savings in many cases. So I've seen that ramp up quite a bit, and I bet it'll continue to head in that direction.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Jake, I want to flip it on the other side for a second. When budgets actually get to increase, and that's been some, it's rare, but when the budgets get increased, you as a leader get choices, right? And it goes back to what David and Phillip talked about, is reprioritizing where you're actually going to spend that money. If you have that opportunity, do I do something different? Do I do those things that are not just the nice, not just the must-haves, but do I get to do the nice-to-haves to deliver more solutions back to the business that solves their problems? So there's good situations in budget changes to consider as well.
Without a doubt, and to your point, right? We've seen even in times like a pandemic where budgets are increased because things are needed sooner than later. And strategic executives realize that sometimes the enablement, costs more than what is currently budgeted, but in the long term, it makes a lot more sense in that regard. Again, disruptions come in many different shapes and sizes. I think it's fair to say a data center outage is a large disruption. Brandon, I'm sure you have 50 different stories you can tell, but let's limit this to one. Tell us about, maybe a tough situation that you were able to help a client that may have had an outage in another data center, or maybe an outage in an office, computer closet type of environment, whatever it may have been, that you were able to, change that pain trajectory for that client.
Yeah, and it's being in the data center space, you are fortunately or unfortunately, or however you want to look at it, being in the right place at the right time or the right place at the wrong time, right, with that customer, because they're either experiencing an outage at their own facility or, at a data center facility. And so I've lived through numerous of them, not particularly at Databank, at other facilities, through the 9/11, through Hurricane Sandy. And so you have a tremendous amount of examples that you can go through where facilities went down. I think that wave has passed, and most IT professionals and managers have come to realize that you need to have a disaster recovery practice in place on the application layer, so you can vMotion your footprint out, or have geo-redundancy on your cloud or your own data center footprint. So if one particular site goes down, within 2 hours, 24 hours, 1 week, you can turn up your disaster recovery location. What that has evolved into seeing, what I'm seeing now, what our teams are seeing more, is outages are caused by network. A lot more than they are by the data center power going out and our UPS systems or our switching gear not working, right? It's customers are getting hit on their network, whether that's the provider and network carrier having a fiber cut in the street, whether they're getting DDoS attacked, or a massive outage now, which I would particularly want to talk to, is crypto hacking, right? So you get hacked, ransomware, and you get crypto locked out of your data. Well, you might have gotten DDoS attacked 6 weeks ago, 6 months ago, but on the back end, you were crypto locked. So you had hackers sneak in on the back end, and you don't know how long they were in your systems for. Were they in your platform and your systems for a week, a day, 2 months, 3 months, right? A year? And then they slam you with the crypto lock, and then they hold you ransom. And so this is typical in the financial vertical, the healthcare vertical, anybody with sensitive data. Those are the folks getting hit hard. So your disaster recovery is, how far can I roll back? And is that far enough to when they were inside my system? And then when you do your disaster recovery, now you have to go from your DR location back to your primary, and that's restoration. So disaster recovery is a hot button, is a hot topic, and it's a big sell. Restoration is even bigger, and what we boast at Databank in our cybersecurity practice majority is disaster prevention. Stop it before they can get inside your proverbial gates, right? So you want things like IP intrusion detection, IP intrusion prevention, active monitoring at your perimeter. So you want to be able to have those kinds of metrics at the bits and bytes layer, not necessarily such as the data center layer, right? I think data centers are pretty damn good these days. Every competitor of mine is a world-class competitor, and we're all competing on who has the best lobby and snacks, because uptime, we all know the best practices these days. From you're looking at a data center provider, you should be looking deeper into how that provider or Tier 4's providers can help you on the disaster prevention side, mostly on your network.
Yeah, and outages obviously are more than just data center, right? To your point, Brandon. From a PBX perspective, I can't tell you how many times we've gotten involved with clients over the last 7 years that refer to this old thing in the closet that's going to die any day. And outages when they take place in data overall can be very, very challenging. When outages take place in dial tone, they can feel immediate and very, very large. David, from your perspective, I mean, how often are you talking with clients who are having outages, and what type of conversations are those with regards to what Mitel might bring? And then Phillip, I'm going to come to you next to talk about what obviously Five9 has seen in that same category.
Yeah, so I mean, you hit the nail on the head. You got a lot of customers that are existing today with physical equipment with a lot of limitations as far as their ability to have some kind of resiliency built into their existing PBX. So with cloud-based solutions today, it alleviates a lot of that with the ability to do things like geo-redundancy, additional circuits, SIP trunking that allows you to easily migrate in the event of an unlikely data center outage, but also a physical fiber cut like Brandon was describing. Allows the customer to migrate their facilities and still be able to do business as usual.
Yeah, and I think David hit it right on the head. The ability for a company to build the redundancy you get in cloud on-prem existed. The lift and the cost was so heavy it was almost never justifiable, right? So the cloud is going to naturally give you redundancy that most companies simply couldn't afford historically, especially when you think about geographic redundancy and the ability to build really kind of mirrored systems that can fail over to one another, on demand on a moment's notice.
I just wanted to remind anybody that's attending as a participant to the webinar, by the way, you can go ahead and chat us any questions that you may have for the panelists. We'll go ahead and open up that feature now in case you want to ask me or any of the panelists questions that pertain to today's subject of disruptions. Kelly, I saw you unmute. Did you have a follow-up on that point?
Yeah, I was going to say that we're seeing that, what you just spoke about and the two partners talking about resiliency. That's the main driver that we're seeing clients wanting to move to the cloud. So they have an on-prem PBX of some kind. It's unstable. They don't have DR. It costs very much to put another system in another location. So you get that built-in resiliency with a MyCloud or a Five9's system. So I'm seeing more of that movement in that direction.
Oftentimes through disruptions, we are reactionary rather than being proactive at times in a sense of going out and finding the next best thing for our organization. And so we find ourselves in more of a defensive position than an offensive position. Not in all cases, but in some cases. From a leadership perspective, Eric, we'll start with you on this one. How can we, obviously none of us have a crystal ball, but how can we better position ourselves as leaders for those who are attending this webinar that are leaders running teams? You referenced having 150 direct reports at a prior position. How can we better suit ourselves to be more offensive rather than defensive and be more maybe prepared for some of these disruptions than maybe we have historically?
Yeah, I think in the last 8-10 years, IT leadership, the role of IT leadership has basically changed in terms of not bringing the business the latest, greatest, shiny new whistle. The IT leadership has had to get closer to the business and understand where the business is actually trying to go. And in doing that, the IT leader can be a lot more proactive, assuming the budget's there, right? A lot more proactive, and the business case, it becomes more of a sales job than it does. Here's your IBM gear. It's the best, since sliced bread. Live with it, as opposed to coming back with, is it a Mitel solution? Is that the best solution? Is the Five9 solution? Is that the best solution? And they're having to come back and be a little more proactive and tell the story, not technically, but what it means, what it will mean to the business. Is it reduced risk? Is it faster uptime in an outage like you just talked about? so I think leadership getting more closer to the business and listening to the business requirements will help craft and design more proactive versus reactive, because historically we're as sysadmins, we were always putting out fires somewhere. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
most definitely. Kelly, did you have something to chime in on that as well?
I think about, you mentioned budgets a while back. There's clients that probably wish they would have invested in some of these technologies last year, saying, let's just put it off. Let's get it in 2020. We'll meander through the project. I'm sure they wish they would have made those decisions sooner and have been more prepared for the remote, work from home environment. That's not going to go away. That might even grow in popularity. But I know that they wished, I've talked to several that say, yeah, I just wish I didn't put that off.
Yeah, that's true. In our position here at Tier 4, we get a lot of visibility into a lot of different things. And to your point, we've heard that quite a bit, especially the last 4 or 5 weeks. As we talk about the idea of adopting new technologies, having the budget to do so, needing to move fast, I'm just kind of curious, and it might be worth 30 seconds, 45 seconds or less. From a 5.9 perspective, just kind of curious, what does that take to implement? If a client came and said, hey, 5.9, I'm ready to sign something today, I need help, today. What is realistic to think a time frame or a timeline of a project like that might be?
Yeah, I think, timelines are always somewhat influenced based on requirements. So obviously there's a little bit of fluidity there, but we've seen contact centers turned up in our cloud system within 48 hours recently. So you're talking about generally days or weeks. A 48-hour turnaround is a little stressful for all of us, certainly achievable, right? And in cases where the business justification exists, we are more than willing to jump in and help with those things. But generally you're talking about probably days or weeks to have a contact center turned up in cloud versus what was often months or in some cases years with the legacy platforms.
And David, we'll get to you in a second. Next, I wanted to go to Brandon. Brandon, obviously we understand what a lift and shift might mean, what those project timelines are, what migrating to the cloud could take. For those of us who have been doing this for a decade or more, we understand some of the pain there. But with regards to maybe the security offering that Databank has, let's say a client raised their hand today and said, yep, I need that right away. What does the transition into partnering with Databank look like from that perspective?
Sure. So the cybersecurity is a huge, call it Chinese menu of things that you can pick, not just from DDoS mitigation, but all the way into, again, that app layer of data integrity and protection. So we really want them to be on our network, on our platform. So whether you're coloed in our data center and then you take IP from us, now you're on our network, right? Now we can offer those perimeter security services. If you are in our cloud, I mean, that's gravy, because now we can lease you the firewalls in an HA configuration. We can do the firewall rule injections and manage all of that, your licensing, your patching, and the OS. We can do all of that for you. And so we have an integration and an implementation team, which has been huge. It's just been a lifesaver for our sales team because we're up against a lot of big household names. And so when we introduce our customers to our implementation team comes in and says, here's where you are today, whether that's on-prem or in the Amazon or in Azure. Here's where we are. Here's a plan with benchmarks, checkpoints, and everything to get there. We have in-house Linux programmers. We've got systems admins, CCINEs on the network side. So people with core competencies and skills inside that layer to basically be for hire. We're an extension of the IT team, and we sell that by the hour. So this project to get from, your platform to our platform may take 200 hours, and we will bundle that into the deal, right? And either amortize that or you can pay it up front. And that also applies to the cybersecurity. How do you get your network perimeter inside our network? Do you want us to manage it? If not, how much of that pie do you want us to manage? And then again, it's a huge menu of cybersecurity service that I can't list off the top of my head, but we've got a completely different division headed up by a CIO, and that's his role and his entire department is to have these conversations with the customers before it's too late, right? Yeah. Disaster prevention.
No, it's good. And obviously security and compliance, as with communicating with clients, staying in business, so to speak, from a technology perspective, is only becoming more and more important, especially in times like these. David, to kind of flip the questioning around a little bit, I mean, when we talk about quickly evolving to manage the demand, what have you seen from a Mitel perspective, considering the constraints of the current pandemic? How are businesses accelerating, that communication requirement, and what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, we've had several, as I'm sure most everybody on this panel can attest to, that, we've got companies that were potentially looking at making an investment, or maybe they weren't even thinking about it, and we're able to come in and offer them a cloud solution that'll quickly get them migrated over to a working remotely environment with the whole suite of collaboration tools that they need to stay in business, from video collaboration, instant messaging, soft phone capabilities that they didn't have prior. And they're doing this, I mean, we're doing it within, like Phillip said, weeks, or in some cases we've seen 2 or 3 day turnaround for smaller organizations to where they can do business remotely. So it's evolving and changing very quickly in our industry.
Yeah, perfect. Wanted to take a couple of questions from the audience here. Someone had asked, what type of involvement does Tier 4 advisors have with disruptions? Eric and Kelly, I'll let you guys chew on that for a second. I'll do my best to answer that since I have a second to think about that. I mean, again, when I founded Tier 4 Advisors, it was really on the premise of helping IT teams and IT professionals make good strategic choices with regards to what vendors do what best. Not to say that we would ever hope for a recession or hope for a pandemic, God knows, but we candidly are built for clients who need to do things right away and who need to make the right choice the first time. And so in the sense of internal project management compared to maybe what doing a project with Tier 4's help would be, you're talking, let's just call it a 300 to 500 hour project in a legacy way of doing it internally versus outsourcing maybe 80 or 90% of that work to a Tier 4 advisors and leveraging our expertise that Kelly, Eric, and a lot of our other team members would bring. Eric, did you want to touch on anything regarding that point?
No, that you touched what I was going to say. Kelly and I hate to use the cliche, but we've been there and done that. And so we truly act as an extension of your team, and we don't waste your team's time. We know the basic questions to ask because we've seen it, and we know what we're looking for. And so we cut that time frame. What in some of my former companies would take 6 to 12 months to run a project down to weeks. Yeah. So,
and Jake, I would add, looking at the list of these disruptors, and there certainly are many more, but Tier 4 has helped clients with every one of these, and now we add pandemic to the list. I didn't think I'd be saying that, but changes in budgets. I mentioned expense management programs that we can lead, leadership changes. The new leader wants a third pair of eyes, if you will, to assess and and help him or her understand what his new or her organization looks like. So we do those assessments. Same with mergers and acquisitions, outages. I've got poor service today. Help me stabilize my environment. We move them to a Databank. So we help in all of those ways.
Absolutely. And I see our VP of Marketing, Joel Anderson, jumping on. So we're probably getting the hook here, quarter to the hour. But again, in times like these, we, not an effort to ever sell anything, but more in an effort to just let people know we are here to help any way we possibly can. I know there's a lot of people getting inundated by people who are trying to help. Again, that is not the stance that we're in of trying to bother people or get in the way. There's a lot of different distractions and things that people have in their positions. But with that said, I want to thank Phillip, Brandon, David, Kelly, Eric, and thank you guys for your time, your expertise, the value you brought to today's panel. Thank to all the attendees out there as well. Joel, I will turn it back over to you.
Appreciate it, Jake. And again, yes, thank you to our attendees and to our panelists. Appreciate the insight that you shared. If anyone has any questions for any of our panelists or has any specific needs or any of these disruptions that they might be going through either now or in the future, mergers and acquisitions will still continue. Disruptions, outages will still happen. We'd love to be able to be a resource and a partner for you. So reach out to a Tier 4 Advisors team member, visit tier4advisors.com, and also you can reach out to our panelists as well. Make sure to tune in next week, Wednesday, 2 p.m. for another upcoming webinar, Meeting the New Demands of IT Security and Compliance. So look forward to seeing you next week, 2 p.m. Eastern. Thanks all. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.